suspension of the Orlando area state attorney. And this is the second time he's removed a democratically elected prosecutor whose politics did not align with his conservative views. DeSantis said he was moving Monique Worrell of Florida's Ninth Judicial Circuit for neglect of duty and incompetence, and he accused her of pursuing lenient sentences and declining to prosecute certain charges. He said prosecutors have a duty to faithfully enforce the law. One's political agenda cannot trump this solemn duty. Refusing to faithfully enforce the laws of Florida puts our communities in danger and victimizes innocent Floridians. That's what he said. So these criticisms echo ones raised last year when he contentiously removed another Democratic state attorney, Tampa's elected prosecutor, Andrew Warren. Democrats accused DeSantis at that time of abusing his power, political gain. A federal judge reviewing Warren's suspension raised questions about the political motivations behind the maneuver, noting DeSantis's office has calculated the dollar amount of free media generated by his actions. But the move earned DeSantis glowing coverage from conservative outlets, and the episode became a staple of his political speeches in the lead up to his launch for the White House. Well, I'll stop reading that. What are your thoughts, Irma? You and I have been talking about DeSantis for a minute. What are your thoughts first? And Yusef, jump in as well.
Sure.
Go ahead, Irma.
Well, I would start by saying anybody who takes on Mickey Mouse and wants to challenge them, his fight against Walt Disney is crazy. Okay, so, but this is not surprising. DeSantis clearly is he's losing in the polls so far in terms of going up against Trump, who may or may not be able to run, but this culture of whiteness, and by that, I don't just mean people who are phenotypically white. I mean people who share the ideology of white superiority and who want to walk with whiteness, whether they are, people of color who, think that if they align themselves with whiteness, they'll be okay. I think what we're seeing is this rise of white nationalism. And DeSantis is critiquing people who are actually trying to uphold the democratic principles of the justice system, which has not been historically the case. Historically, Black folks have been at the wrong end of the justice system. That has been proven time and time again. And when DeSantis makes these accusations about upholding law and order, what he means is a white law and order in which Blacks are always persecuted.
Yusef, what do you think?
Well, a couple of things now. One, the two prosecutors who DeSantis suspended were democratically elected, number one. Mm-hmm. And a judge determined that the action was unconstitutional, but said that as a federal judge, he had no ability to intervene in what is clearly a state legislative matter. The legislature could reinstate the two judges, but the legislature has a conservative majority who are basically fearful of and in lockstep with the governor.
Yes.
Now, as Dr. Irma pointed out, he spent a month attacking the teaching of the 1619 Project, Black History, and Black Advanced Placement. And when that did not gain traction for his presidential campaign, he's now moving to tough on law and order and the suspense of these two judges, which he mentions in every campaign speech, to show how silly this business is and how it is indeed politically motivated. One only has to look at the fact that his staff calculated the dollar value of the free value in publicity that he has gained as a result of these suspensions, as opposed to his campaign. So frankly, he's doing anything to keep the lights and the cameras on, because he fired his presidential campaign manager yesterday or the day before, and his presidential campaign, although he's in second place of the 12 contenders running against Trump, his presidential campaign is going nowhere. And hopefully that will be, the continuing theme of it.
Let's shift to the next topic, and this is called, well, from an article in the Times Weekly. The article is headlined, America's Demographic Shifts and the Racial Generation Gap, a Spark for Political Tensions, published on August 10th, actually published by our publisher or editor at the National Newspaper Publishers Association, NNPA. And Stacy is writing that it's been a poorly kept secret that the underlying reason for much of America's hate seen in recent years revolves around the fear that white people are fast losing their grip on the nation's majority. That fear has resonated and is ever present politically and socially. The January 6th insurrection, former President Donald Trump and his MAGA supporters, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' assault on Black history, the uptick in hate crimes, including police brutality against African Americans, and the continued wave of Karens and Kens. Indeed, he writes, white supremacists and white nationalists and the politicians who fuel them see a new majority, people of color, and that has served to spark what's more and more beginning to look like an all-out civil war, or more pointedly, a race war. In April 2021, the Census Bureau released the first set of results from the 2020 decennial census, providing a snapshot of the U.S. population for use in congressional reapportionment and redistricting. But recently, the agency released more detailed census information that shows a fuller picture of the population as it stood during the once-a-decade head count. These new statistics make plain that substantial old-young racial gaps exist in much of the country and are likely to persist in the near term, says William H. Frey, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute. He said, this is reflected in a cultural generation gap that underlies many aspects of the nation's social fabric and politics, including views about the recent Supreme Court decision on affirmative action and state proposals to limit teaching about race and diversity in public schools. That report was released in research recently by the Brookings Institute. So it's a good piece. It's a good read. Check it out. But let's stop there for a second. So Irma, back to you again. Demographics and the cultural, racial dimensions of the shift in demographics. Explain it. Explain what we should know about it. Why is it important? Go ahead.
I one of the things that you didn't mention is that this fear of disappearance is also what's fueling the immigration policies, because the fastest growing population are Latinos. And so there is a real fear that they are going to numerically outnumber white folks. And I think I've been saying that we are moved into an era of what I call the reclamation of whiteness since 2014. I've been seeing it coming. I've been calling it out. And I think this is that it has become more explicit and overt, whereas historically it's been kind of subversive and underground. I think Trump opened the door widely with his executive order, which most people don't know that Biden actually rescinded, but it was an order that said you could not talk about race, you could not teach about critical race theory, and not only for federal employees, but anyone who had a contract with the federal government. And I wrote about that piece. Biden did rescind that executive order, but it was really an attempt to institutionalize what we now know as white nationalism. There's a real deliberate attempt to roll back the clock and bring us to a moment in time when, quote unquote, Black folks knew their place, white folks were superior, whether they were really intelligent or not, it didn't matter as long as they had white skin, and that there was a kind of domination going on. And I think we're seeing a resurgence of that both politically and socially.
Yusef, comment?
4 comments, Al. First, I have a friend who sent me a meme, and the title of the meme was a sheriff's badge, and on it said, "The days of the white man are numbered." And let me spell that out a little more specifically. Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, the noted Black psychiatrist and author of the cross-color confrontation theory, said in the 1970s that the root cause of racism was the fear of genetic annihilation. Now, let me take that 2 steps further. There is among white supremacist circles and increasingly in the broader public discussion of what's called the replacement theory.
Yes.
And this speaks to what Dr. Irma was just discussing. The largest segment of the older population, over 55, are white people. The largest segment of younger people, 18 and under, including in Minnesota, are people of color. And Trump himself publicly pronounced that this may be the last election, the presidential election coming up in 2024, that white people are able to win. Now, those are his words, not mine. And if you followed some of the news coverage of the Proud Boys, the Boogaloo Boys, and the white nationalist protests and marches, they've been chanting 2 things. On one hand, they're heard saying, "You will not replace us," repeatedly. And by the same token, some of them are saying, "Jews will not replace us." But this is all about the replacement theory, that they fear that they will be replaced politically, culturally, economically, geographically, statistically by people of color. And what we're going to see are these sleight of hand tricks. They're coming up with the term biracial to try and water down the strength of the total category of people of color, whether it's a single race or whether it's races, all races combined. You've now got biracial, which really is not a category and doesn't mean anything. It just means you don't count for nothing in terms of allotments or allocations or health or whatever the government has given away. We're also seeing the attempts to gerrymander districts in which people of color have a great chance of electing, self and kind to state and national legislative bodies. One case in North Carolina, the judge said even Ray Charles could see that this was intended to prevent black people from voting. So we're going to throw this out right away. And this is occurring across the country in line with the attempts to block 1619 Project, critical race theory, any attempt at the discussion of race. Teachers are afraid, school boards are afraid. There's this parents movement in public education that is trying to retake control of the schools and eliminate all this discussion about diversity, equity, and inclusion, whatever that means. My grandmother used to say, anytime something means everything, it don't mean nothing. So we need to be very clear and specific, as Dr. Irma always is, about what we talk about and what the consequences and implications of that discussion are. So again, the days of the white man are numbered, no disrespect intended, but within 20 years in this country, the majority of the physical human beings occupying this space called the United States are going to be people of color. And so the attempt is going to be to divide, to pit us against one another, to have us in competition for, the droppings, the scarce resources, whether it's economic, whether it's political, whether it's cultural, housing, it doesn't matter, jobs. There already are numerous attempts to get various communities of color at one another's throats. This notion of who has the greatest oppression, this game that they want us to play is silly. And where we've gathered in coalition, where we've complemented and supported one another's efforts, we've clearly made the fastest and greatest progress. And I would remind us that the civil rights movement was the engine that pulled all of the other social change movements out of the station of discrimination. Okay. So the women's movement, the gay pride movement, the Black Panthers, the Senior Panthers, Great Panthers, all these different groups, their success.
Immigration. Immigration.
Right. Women's movement, feminism, all of it. Yes.
Let me just say this. The Immigration Naturalization Act was passed in 1965 only because the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act preceded it. And Lyndon Johnson said, now that we've got this out of the way, we can deal with immigration, because up until 1965, 80% of the seats for people immigrating to the United States were reserved for white people from Northern Europe.
Yes.
Okay? And not for people of color. And we need to be real clear what that was about. And the government kept changing the definition of what constitutes white people as the population decreased. And they're at a point now where the only thing left for them to do is to claim biracial. Because
listen,
biracial people have some more heritage.
Stacey Brown's article continues that Generation Z will be the last generation of Americans with the white majority, according to the census data that he said reported from Daniel DeVries, who wrote an article for The Hill. And it said that the nation's so-called majority minority arrived with Generation Alpha, those who were born since 2010.
2010.
DeVries added, barely 2 decades from now, what you said, Yusef, around 2025, non-Hispanic white people will fall below half a share of the overall U.S. population. And he concluded that America's white majority and its numbered days, right, is a lightning rod topic, given the nation's history of slavery and enduring patterns of discrimination against minorities and immigrants. He concludes with, or the article concludes that, it acknowledges that race is the most complicated variable in the census, and it's the item that draws people like moths to the flame. That is a quote from Dowell Myers, a professor of policy planning and demography at the University of Southern California, in an article at The Hill. And then Justin Jest, who's a professor at George Mason University's Scholar School of Policy and Government, said that in this environment, nationalism has experienced a rebirth.
Exactly.
And
not only that, it is being institutionalized. Both are focused on DeSantis, but a year ago, the state of Iowa had an anti-critical race theory legislation already enacted. So that's been in place. And before that, Arizona, I believe, and Texas have made it illegal to teach Latin American history in the schools. So this is not new stuff. It's just that it's been like the aggressiveness of white nationalism has been much more, and coupled with white supremacy, has been much more aggressive than it's been historically since since the civil rights movement. So I am seeing shades of George Wallace that says segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. What we're seeing, and what we're seeing now is this sense of protecting whiteness in whatever way by any means necessary.
Well,
so
Irma, it's going to ramp up during this presidential campaign.
Yes.
Believe me, it's going to get significantly more intense than it is right now. And it is intense right now.
And what we're going to see is more violence.
What role do you see, what reaction or proactivity do you see emanating from our community? How will we not simply be reactionary or responding to, but how will we be moving our agenda forward, understanding and knowing that there's going to be this backlash? It's always been there, but it'll be intensified. Is what we're saying right now. What do you think? How do we make sure that we don't lose our focus and that we keep confident that the change we seek is the change that is going to occur?
Educate, advocate, and litigate. Okay, we gotta clue people in, help them understand what's happening, encourage them to participate in civic affairs like voting, and where necessary, we need to litigate, Al, to seek the changes that this sister who was suspended in Florida from the prosecuting attorney is going to court, filing a lawsuit against DeSantis and the state of Florida, as she should. And the conservative Florida legislature is not going to reinstate her. She's going to have to seek justice in the courts because a federal judge has declared that what DeSantis has done is unconstitutional, but he's powerless to act because it's a state matter. So she's going to have to go to state courts to get that suspension thrown out. And the brother who was suspended last year is going to have to go with her because, again, they were both democratically elected, ran for election, and won those offices. The governor.
Well, the courts have thrown out his effort to get reinstated. So I think that means that at some point in time, beyond seeking redress in the state court, it'll have to go to a federal court at some point in time. That's what I'm thinking.
And I think at some point we have to impress upon our people the importance of voting, not just for the high-powered offices of congressmen, state representative, state senator, and president, but judges, that these things make a difference. School boards, these things make a difference, and we need to be involved. But we also simultaneously with what Yusef has said is we have to also come up with alternative ways of communicating. We cannot rely upon schools to tell the truth. We've had this honeymoon in which we've had Black studies and women's studies and all of these things, and now we may see those things disintegrating. And so just like we used to have the Saturday schools, just like the Chinese send their kids to Chinese school, to learn Mandarin, Jewish people send their kids to schools, to learn about Jewish history and culture. We need to resurrect, those mediums. We need to support Black newspapers, Black press. We need to support Black programs and stations. So we need to find, and we need to use the tools that are available to us, social media, all of these things, to be able to let people know that there is an alternative to interpretation of what's going on.
Irma, I would add that we need to define what we mean when we talk about Black programs and Black schooling, because we have freedom schools, we have the Institute for African Education, and there are things that go under the guise or the umbrella of Black that are not in the best interest of our community.
Right. That is true.
And there's so much out there. We need to be very careful that we select those things that are positive and affirming and promote self-sufficiency and subsistence.
Well, here's another third piece that I think is a great segue from the conversation we're having, but also when we finish, it'll open up the next and final part of the program. We have authors here who are talking about their work and about book writing. Our books editor, W. Foster Graham, is here with a guest that you're going to be excited to hear from. But the article that I want you, Irma, and you, Yusef, to respond to is one that is entitled Unapologetically Black, Why Authors of Color Shouldn't Write for White Audiences. And this is a piece that was in HuffPost. It's a first-person piece by an author, Habiba Katsha. And this was a piece that was published in, I think, August of 2022. So it's a year old, but it's interesting. And I'm going to make a comment about it, tying it to current events. I mentioned before the show that if not today, I wanted this and us to take a deep dive on the stuff that happened in the past week down in Montgomery, Alabama, where a lot of Black people came to the rescue of a Black worker who was being attacked for doing his job, attacked by angry, entitled white people. We won't have time to go into that today, but it's been capturing social media almost worldwide. And I think it's worth analysis. Maybe we'll spend the time in the future going into that. But this story, Unapologetically Black, Why Authors of Color Shouldn't Write for White Audiences. And the subhead is, Why Do Authors of Color Have to Explain Themselves in Their Stories? Again, it's by Habiba Katsha. I'll read a couple of paragraphs and let you guys jump onto it. She writes, I'm a bookish babe, a term that was made popular by the original bookish babe herself, Hannah Bryan. When I'm not reading books, I'm thinking about the next story I'll dive into. When I'm not thinking about them, I'm buying them. My life revolves around reading. Hip, hip, hooray for that. Which isn't bizarre, considering that I was raised by bookish parents. Both my parents studied literature at the university, so the love of reading came naturally to my sister and I, specifically the love for Black books. She goes on to write, as I write this in my living room, I can see my bookcase filled with titles like I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings by Maya Angelou, Home Going by Yajiasi, Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid, Nelson Mandela, The Long Walk to Freedom, and countless others. Unlike the literature we were taught at school, my indoor library has always been packed with books by Black authors. The books I read growing up were unapologetically Black. But as I started getting older, I noticed a shift in the way the stories were told when penned by Black authors and other writers of color. I couldn't quite put my finger on it till I watched this TikTok. And I don't know, want to show the TikTok, Yasmin?
Video is
I
for
don't know if I see
non-white
it on
readers,
my-
so if you're white, you can watch the video, but I don't care for your opinion on this. I find that when I'm reading romance books, I'm going to stick with romance because this is where I see this most often. When I find when I'm reading romance novels written by non-white authors, there are two very distinct categories that book will fall into. And it's either this was clearly written for a white audience, or this was written with the community in mind. And I find that the biggest distinction between those things is, on one hand, it's teaching rather than storytelling and trying to convince this white audience to care and like your culture. And the other is writing from your perspective without justification or explanation, without any hint of shame, just telling the story with the people that you're writing about being kind of the main target audience. So I'm Palestinian, and sticking with that, the example would be taking, let's say you're writing about dinner, right? And you're having sakhan. On this hand, it would just be like, you know, we ate sakhan, we hung out, blah, blah, blah. You keep going with the story. The fact that you ate sakhan isn't a pivotal detail. But on this hand, it would be, and then we ate sakhan, the spices mixed in my mouth, the traditional onion and chicken flavors. It is a dish known in this region and this and this. And it just becomes this thing where it's like over the top description and explanation that wouldn't be necessary if you were talking to somebody within your community, another Palestinian.
Interesting. Okay, Irma, Yusef, what do you think? Unmute Irma. There you go.
I think we could spend a whole program talking about this topic, Al. It is a very interesting and complicated, and you've got some Black authors in the wings on the tail end of the program. Maybe they can complement and support. Let me try and be brief. It's difficult to determine who you're writing for because depending on what instrument you're using, whoever accesses it can do that. There's also a difference between writers who happen to be Black and Black writers. And again, my definition of Black is color, culture, and consciousness. But there are books in my library by Taylor Branch. There are books by Timothy Tyson. When I was in high school, I read and got a lot out of Khalil Gibran. So, who's the fellow who wrote The People's History of the United States, who was white, who was genuinely authentic and colorblind? So, yeah, I write for a Black audience, but I also write for whoever can benefit from what I have to say. And they can bless it by the use they put it to. And if it doesn't ring their bell, they can pass it on or delete it or share it with somebody else, because unapologetically means just that. Shamelessly, without permission, and intentionally. And I think that, Black authors do that, need to continue to do that, and that Black people need to continue to obtain and support those works by Black authors, not just authors who happen to be Black.
You know, I find it very interesting that we have people of color, non-Black people, who are just now discovering this, and this may be for them a new phenomenon, but Black people have been telling their truth and writing for their own Black audiences for a very long time. You know, we go back to Phyllis Wheatley was writing her truth. She didn't know who could read because remember, it was illegal to teach Black folks to read and write, but that doesn't mean she wasn't writing for a Black audience. We go back to David Walker's Appeal, which was in the 1700s, you know, where Black people are always having an opportunity to speak our truth and write for ourselves. So this is not new to us. It may be new for some other groups of color, but it is not new for us. And so I go with what Toni Morrison said. She was very clear whenever she got asked those crazy questions about, so when are you going to stop doing this Black stuff and write a universal or write for everybody, as if somehow white people represent everybody. She was very clear. I write for Black women. And if other people enjoy it, it's okay. Okay, so she's not saying that other people can't enjoy it, they can't connect to it, but she's very clear about who her audience is. I speak my truth as a Black person, as an unapologetically Black person, and I write in a way that I think is going to resonate with Black audiences, but it also resonates with other people too. So the two are not mutually exclusive. This whole thing, you know, and I think some of it's generation. Some of these folks need to go back and read history before they make these global statements, because they will find there is a long tradition already in place. We've been doing this for a long time. So it's not new for us.
Well, it's like they just woke up.
Yeah, exactly. They just got woke.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, listen, what a good conversation. I want you guys to stand by and maybe come back in a couple of minutes. We'll shift this, use this to pivot to the other guest I have and bring in W.D. Foster Graham and have him introduce authors and an event coming up that's an important one about this topic, books and writing, shaping our own narrative. W.D. Foster Graham, my brother, how you doing? Unmute.
Hey, Al. Like I said, it's good to be here one more time.
There we go. Well, this is a good conversation, but what a perfect way to go to this segment to talk about people who are on the front line of doing books, writing books, creating books. Introduce your guest.
Thank you, Al. Well, it is my great pleasure to introduce our guest for this segment. One of our guests, Dr. Talea Tolafree, is the founder and CEO of Koinonia Academy here in St. Paul, Minnesota. She is also the founder and executive director of a girls leadership institute known as Empowered to Be Me. Her daughter, Nia Imani Tolafree, is a community engagement coordinator, and she is also a founding member of Empowered to Be Me. She and her mother co-authored the book, Black Girl, What Do You See? I See a Black Princess Looking at Me. And last but not least, we have Dorothy Nins. She is the development director of the organization Power of People Leadership Institute, and she is the executive director of the Minnesota Black Authors Expo. And say it's been an honor and privilege to be a supporter for both.
Well, great. Let's bring them on camera and welcome and let them say hello and talk about what's. I'm curious about the collaboration. Dr. Tolafree or Toll-Free? How do I say it properly?
Toll-Free.
Toll-Free. Dr. Toll-Free and Nia, welcome. Talk about your collaboration. What is this book? What's the intent, the purpose, and the impact that you are seeking in developing this book? And just give us the inside story on mom and daughter working together to produce a work of value for our community and for our time.
Okay. Me and my mom thought to create this book to encourage Black girls to be confident in their hair and any style that they choose to wear it in, because a lot of times we hear negative things about our hair from a lot of people outside of our community. They always have things to say about it. And so we thought
hold it up more, hold the book up more so we can hold the book. There we go. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. And you can flip through the pages if you want. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So we thought it was a great way to encourage Black girls to be confident in their hair. And also we were intentional about creating all the girls in different shades and skin tones. And also including all the different African print dresses as well.
How much fun was it doing that project? Or was it fun, or how much hard work was it, or both?
It was both. It was really fun creating this because I wouldn't have never thought I would be an author, especially at my age.
How old are you?
When it was published, I was 17. I'm 18 now.
Amazing. Well, congratulations.
Thank you so much. The process, actually writing the book was probably about a month or 2 months, and then the illustrations took a while because we were very intentional about every detail on each page. That was a more of a back and forth type of thing.
Well, let's bring Dr. Talaya in as well. Dr. Talaya, good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for being here. Congratulations on this collaboration. What does it mean? Why is it important that you've done what you've done?
Thank you for having us. I think Nia explained it pretty good. We wanted to make sure that Black girls felt like they were affirmed in their Blackness, affirmed in their natural hair, their natural beauty, that they don't have to apologize for who they are, or even the natural hair that grows out of their heads. We want them to know that they are the standard of beauty, and that they can learn that at a very young age. Oftentimes, people don't think that even at the preschool age, our children are having identity crisis about who they are as Black children, and what their hair looks like versus the hair that they may see across the table at school. And so we wanted to be very intentional about centering Black girls, centering them as a beauty of, or the standard of beauty, so that they could be confident and feel affirmed.
And so talk about your business end of approaching this. You've created a company, Sankofa Moments Publishing. Tell us about that.
So Sankofa Moments Publishing was birthed in the middle of the pandemic. So like many of us, when the pandemic hit, we paused a little bit and kind of did reflection on some of those things that we had put aside. So I remember I was working with two of my colleagues, two African-American women. We were doing some strategic planning, and during our retreat, we carved out time for writing. And so we just said that we would just go to the side and write whatever comes to mind. And so for me, what came to mind is writing some children's books. So I started that in 2018, and it kind of was on hold. And then during the pandemic is when I published my first book, which is entitled Grandma Sankofa's House.
And what discoveries did you make in publishing your first book?
Well, it took a lot more time than I thought it would. And then in addition to the time that it takes in general, again, it was in the middle of the pandemic, right? And not only were we dealing with the pandemic, we were also dealing with the traumatic murder of George Floyd. And so there were a number of things that we were dealing with as a community, as humanity. And the book, the Grandma Sankofa's House, is really about restorative practices. And so teaching children how we can be in better relationship, and the value of voice, the value of community, the value of intergenerational relationships. And so that came at a time that was really fitting as we think about our humanity.
Let's bring Dorothy Nins in, and maybe we can bring Dr. Irma back in as well, because Dr. Irma put a note in the chat that would be great to respond to. But Dorothy, good afternoon, my friend. How are you? Good to see you.
Good afternoon. It's always good to see you. It's always good to be on Al McFarlane, because you know that's where it's at.
Well, thank you. Thank you. You know, the key for me, though, is that we have to always lift up the gifts that we have and the gifts that we are. And we have to walk in the world, walk in community, aware of our
Yes,
value and our mission and of the uh, potential of sacredness that
mm,
emanates from every breath, right? And if we
absolutely.
can center our minds and our hearts with that intention, and we begin to see the divine in each other, and we commit ourselves to both reflecting and telling that story. Well, who does that more than a book publisher or a book writer, an author, a journalist? And so I love to have you on because you talk about organizing our people to celebrate, to understand, and to normalize our relationship with the written word, with books. Talk about that, if you would.
Well, I can tell you that I've always loved books. Books have always been a prominent part of my life. And my father had so many books, we didn't have time, we didn't have space for furniture. So we love books, and we love really the narrative of our people, making sure that our books tell our stories, and which leads me to this year's Minnesota Black Authors Expo, which is going to be held at De La Salle High School on Saturday, October 21st. And our theme this year is dreaming in color, telling our stories to save our lives. And we've got to have our own stories told by us in our own voices for us, so that we might heal and be in greater relationship with one another. Because too many times we see so many people in the streets, and they have stories to tell. And maybe if they told their stories, that would be cathartic, and it would be healing for both them and their families and their communities.
And you've written books, Dorothy?
I am writing a book, and I plan to finish this year. I have to finish this year. In fact, I'm going to be going up to my alma mater, University of Minnesota Morris. They will be honoring Bill and Ida Stewart, who were legends in the University of Minnesota community, and in Morris in particular,
Mm-hmm.
because they came to transform not just the campus, but the community, because most of those people in Morris, Minnesota had never seen Black people. And he said, you get out into the community and you represent us well. And so we were called by Bill Stewart to go into those communities to tell our stories to these white people who never saw Black people before. So I'll be going up and speaking and honoring him September 9th. And so that's really important, because he left his manuscript to me. So I must finish it for him, for Bill Stewart.
Okay. Irma, you know, you and I talk about your phenomenal work with the Irma McClaurin Feminist Archive out at UMass Amherst. And I think it's consistent that you are encouraging authors and writers and family and people, ordinary people, to examine and value who they are, what they have, the evidence of their existence, and to be intentional in preserving that. To what end,
Well,
Dr.
I
Irma?
think part of it, I think Zora Neale Hurston is a good example. The latest novel that was published, I think in 2018, Barracoon, lay dormant for something like 65 years after
Mhm.
she wrote it, because she refused to make the changes that publishers wanted her to do. When someone says unapologetically Black, they wanted her to translate Cujo's dialect, which was a fusion of African and English, into standard English so that their white readership could understand it. And she refused. And so they refused to publish her. There's so many gems, people who never finished or who started something and never got it published. So the archive, the Irma McClaurin Black Feminist Archive at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, one is in good company because they have the papers of W.E.B. Du Bois, who, as you know, was probably, was a prolific writer. Uh, and they have 99,000 items. So I don't think that, mine doesn't come anywhere near that personally. But what I'm hoping to do is to mobilize activists, artists, writers, formally, informally, anthropologists, every discipline, every career of Black women, and say what you did was important. And so take the time to preserve it. And so if people are interested, they can reach me at blackfeministarchive@gmail.com. But I think it's important that we preserve what we do.
W.D. Foster Graham, this has been wonderful that you've been creating a space here for us to connect with authors, with the people that are writing books and producing books. What's it mean to you to have the space, and what, you know, as Insight News, what do you feel our obligation, our mission is? What are we seeking to serve?
Oh, thank you. That's an excellent question, Al. And it goes back to an African proverb, which I mentioned on an author panel. And it goes like this. It said, if until the lion shares his side of the story, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. Well, I've had the honor of reviewing books by lions and lionesses. That's who we are. And as the book review editor, I am honored to provide this space so that, you know, we educate, we uplift, we empower by sharing our stories as authors and poets and spoken word. So, because I can remember one instance where when I was writing my second book called You Never Know, I had this experience, and it comes back to something we were talking about earlier today. I was vetting editors, and one of the editors I vetted was a white woman. And when we were talking, I knew we wouldn't be a good fit because, one, she lacked the cultural sensitivity, and she said, "Okay, we need to write this book, you know, to get your white audience interested." And I, in turn, said, "No, we won't be a good fit." And realized when there's historical information there, that was something she was missing. And I was, in my own way, being unapologetically Black.
Mm-hmm. That's
So
interesting. You know, as you're speaking, WD, it reminded me of a story I'll share too, that when we were growing Insight News way back in the day, we had gotten where we were doing massive distribution in North Minneapolis and in Northeast Minneapolis. And we wanted to grow into South Minneapolis as a physical, you know, newspaper. And I approached the owners of a paper called the Southside News, or the paper, I forgot the name of it, but it was kind of the counterpart to Insight as a community newspaper. And it was a counterculture, progressive, you know, liberal progressive, white group that ran the newspaper. You know, and so I reached out and said, "Look, guys, you know, I'm doing half of the city. You guys are doing half the city. Why don't we collaborate? Why don't we join forces and create a bigger, better organization?" And we would actually put ourselves in position to get in the ring with the Star Tribune. And so the white guy says to me, you know, "Yeah, Insight, yeah, Al McFarlane, but what makes you think you have anything to say that will be of interest to white people in South Minneapolis?"
Wow.
And so, I mean, and those were the words, right? And so that comes back to this conversation again. And my point is, we have to be true to ourselves and tell our story to anybody, everywhere, all the time, and not moderate, mollify, you know, self-edit, but lean into our truth and our understanding, our awareness, and lead into it with a vengeance, where we know that there's something at the essential, universal level about our experience and our story. And that's what we share. And we share it with the conviction that any other human being on the planet, if she or he has a beating heart, has potential to understand. And that's what we're talking to, and who we're talking to, by talking first within the culture and to ourselves with our truth. Dr. Chalaia, what do you think about that?
I think that's absolutely right. I don't think that we need to make excuses. We need to be our authentic selves. And that's what our children are looking for. That's what our children are desiring. And that's why Sankofa Moments Publishing is putting on this our Black Children's Book Fair on this Saturday, so that we can be in community and feel affirmed and feel like we can be our authentic selves and tell our stories in the way that we love to tell our stories.
Well, I hope you look at last year, the last issue of July, because we had a story about James Haskins, who also wrote as Jim Haskins, and probably Jim has written more children's books for Black children, but many people don't know his name. And so there's a link to some of his books. He wrote 164 books, most of them biographies of Black people, and people don't know his name. So Insight did a great job of putting the article on the front page and then having it translated into 6 languages. So do look up Jim Haskins.
And Dr. Talaya, invite our viewers and listeners to your event. Take some time and talk more about it, what's going to happen, where it is, and what people will learn and how they stay connected.
All right. Well, we are putting on our first Black Children's Book Fair, Sankofa Moments Publishing's first Black Children's Book Fair. We will be in St. Paul at the Black Youth Healing Arts Center at 643 Virginia Street. Executive Director Dr. Darlene Fry. And so we begin at 11 o'clock on Saturday. We go until 3. We have a dynamic panel. So I'm going to ask people to follow us on Instagram, where you can get more details, and follow us on at our website. But we will start at 11. We'll go into 3. We're going to have DJ Sean Thomas, who's going to be playing music for us for the entire time. We will have our authors read their stories to our children. We'll have meet and greets for children to actually meet Black authors and hear them read their stories. We'll have some games and some fun for our kids and our community. So for us, we thought it was important. A lot of times children's book authors don't get the space. We're oftentimes lost sort of in the mix of a number of other things. And so we thought it was important to create this space so that our Black children's book authors can be affirmed, and that we can work together as community and share our creative books and stories.
Nia, let me ask you what's ahead for you as a writer, as an author. What are your plans, both education and in life? Where do you plan to go, and how do you plan to continue contributing to the what's the right word for it? For the continued development of humanity? What's your role?
Right now, I'm preparing to go into my freshman year of college at Morgan State University, and I'm studying.
Hey, Baltimore. All right. That's my daughter's alma mater, so I'll connect you with her. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm studying entrepreneurship and political science. I've always had an interest in politics a little bit, because I'm very passionate about laws and that kind of stuff and how it affects our community. But ultimately, I just want to make more space and opportunities for kids like me, and just have an open space for them to be their authentic self.
And so what does that mean, Nia, when your generation is able to reveal its authentic self and live and stand in that authenticity? What difference does that make for the world? What can it make for the world? What do you think?
I think it makes people have a more open view of our generation. I think there's a lot of stereotypes about our generation, and I feel like we're more authentically ourselves and open to it and unapologetic about it. I think our generation will make big changes for our future.
And do you see your generation significantly changing the direction of the planet? How big is the vision for you?
It's big. It's magnificent. It's not something I can put into words, but I'm looking forward to see where we are in the next couple of years.
Right. All right. Dorothy, make the invitation again for your upcoming event, if you would. We got about a minute.
Minnesota Black Authors Expo. This is our 7th year, and it will be at De La Salle High School on October 21st. Registration will open, so go to our website, Minnesota MN BlackAuthorsExpo.com, and you can find us on the internet and on Instagram. And so October 21st, put it on your calendars. Tell all of your author friends to meet us there. And last time we were together, there were like 350 people there. So you don't want to miss it. It'll be music and entertainment, a children's corner. It's a family-friendly place, and it's always really sacred space. People who love books are treat all spaces as sacred. So I love it.
Well, this has been a great conversation. Thanks to everybody here, my colleague and friend in Dougal, Yusef Mgeni, Dr. Irma, thank you so much. WD, our editor for books, Dr. Talaya and Nia Amini, Dorothy Nens, thank you all. What a great conversation. And I think we can never stop talking about books. I think we should begin to think of books like books are gold, like books are currency, and that we should collect books and have book collections that we pass on to our grandchildren and great-grandchildren and grow them over 7, 8, 9, 10 generations and watch them appreciate and value because we value them. With that, see you all next time. Take care. Thank you so much.
Thank
Okay,
you.
bye.
Okay.
Appreciate you.